My name is Karen Lowry. I am an ADHD coach and I am an IEP coach. And, oh, that's good. Thank you, everyone, for telling me you can hear me. That's great. Thank you. So I want to tell you a little bit about myself. Well, before I do that, I'll just get some housekeeping kind of cleared up. Again, I'm going to go through this presentation in its entirety, and then when we're done, you can certainly ask me questions. I'm going to try to get through it in about 45 minutes, 45 minutes, and allow the rest of the time of that hour for questions. If I don't get to you, there's just a lot of questions. Just be sure that you've written those questions down because I will follow up with you via email. But I'll do my best to do as many as I can tonight. If you have questions, just type them in the Q&A and I'll see them. And I guess that's it, really. I think first I want to talk about me, just so you know where I'm coming from and what I do know and what I do understand about your children with ADHD. Again, I have become an ADHD coach and an IEP coach over the years. Why did that start? Because my fourth child was born and diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia and anxiety. And I spent an awful lot of time advocating for him in the various issues that you currently are dealing with at this time. And I realized that there was a lot of need out there. So I worked with CHAD, Children and Adults with ADD, as a volunteer, did a lot of community service, presenting lots of presentations to helpfully spread the word as I understood the word, because I knew the helplessness that is out there when you don't have that education and you don't know what to do. So as I did that, I became more aware of ADHD coaching, and I became certified in that area and still advocating for my own son, who has combined ADHD. So yes, I was dealing with behavior issues too, like you, and dealing with people who didn't understand. So then, once I became a coach, I realized that it was really difficult to coach children and families if those children didn't have the support they needed from the school. And in so many cases, they did not have that support. So I find actually now I am more involved with advocacy and IEP issues than I am with actually supporting the coaching piece of it. That is there, but the advocacy is such an important part of it all that that's kind of where I am focused at the moment. So right now, and just to tell you that my son, who had so many struggles throughout the years, and me behind him all the way, is now in his 5th year at St. Joe's University in Philly, not without issues, not without a 504, and not without tutoring, not without coaching. But he is making it, and it can happen, believe me. And what I see is a child who has struggled and struggled and struggled, but he got to a point where he started to mature a little bit, because remember, our kids don't mature as quickly as the neurotypical kids do. And he began to understand himself, and he began to understand what kinds of strategies, what kinds of things that he needed to do to support himself, because he was not there even in college. And he made that happen. He has, over the 2 years, I've seen a major growth. So that's a positive about all of this. As I talk to many of you in the trenches, there is hope. There definitely is hope, because in the end, our kids are bright, intuitive, and they can do it. They just need support in the areas where they need support, just like the rest of us who may be neurotypical, but we have weaknesses as well. And they just need to know that. And so I have a lot of passion about this particular webinar. This is a 3rd of a series that I have done, because I find it to be one of the most important areas to speak to, and many of the areas that parents seek me out for support in this area because of the lack of understanding in the school. And so what happens is, if you don't have understanding in the school and you have a child with ADHD with behaviors that manifest themselves because of that diagnosis, that child gets in a lot of trouble. And what happens after that? They are denied their FAPE, free appropriate public education, and they develop a low self-esteem and becomes a vicious circle. So that all has to stop. So that is one of the reasons why I picked this topic for my third webinar, because I think it's important. It's very important. So I'm going to move on and start going forward. So again, as I said, behavior seems to be a common thread among many of the struggles that families face. Detentions and suspensions and all sorts of things from the schools. And these are some of the reasons that it happens. What causes unsupported behavior connected to ADHD? First of all, ADHD is not visible. You can't see it. And sometimes people forget that if you can't see it, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. The second thing is, there is no test that you can give to confirm a diagnosis. You know, the diagnosis comes from ruling out everything else. A really thorough physical is very important. And really a lot of the testing is through history, because we know that it's genetically based and also based on the behaviors. Connor exams are one of them. So gathering that kind of data from schools regarding behaviors in the classroom can be very important in the diagnostic test. But there's no scan to miraculously come up with a diagnosis. It is one of the most prevalent diagnosed childhood mental disorders, although somehow that doesn't rise to the occasion, you know. People just don't believe in it. I had someone on my Facebook page, the business page, or it was either the business page or it was our closed group that we have. And that person doesn't even believe in ADHD. I'm still I'm a little confused why the person's even on the site. I wouldn't block her because I'm trying to figure out where she's coming from, and she hasn't really said. But you can imagine a lot of the people that have spoken are pretty angry with her. But one of the things she said was, every time I've seen it, it didn't really exist because it was misdiagnosed, and the person didn't really have ADHD. Now, I mean, that's valid. That is true. It is not diagnosed correctly many times, and you know, a lot of times pediatricians are doing the diagnosis and they don't have background to do that. But again, we know that it does exist. Behavior is visible and it's thought to be something that can be controlled. And I think that's a big issue here, because when people see the behaviors, of course, the belief is if you have a behavior, you can certainly stop it. You can certainly control it. Why would you not do that? But our kids can't not necessarily do that without the support. I've also heard high schoolers and middle schoolers should be mature enough to regulate that behavior once they get in high school. And the first thing is they're not mature, like their neurotypical peers necessarily, not all, but you know, that's a consistent issue regarding the level of maturity. And second of all, the behaviors are not going to go away, just like the diagnosis is not going to go away just because they're in high school. The behavior is going to go away and improve when they're supported and positive reinforcements are in place. This is another one. Any testing that substantiates ability and level of intelligence, which means that what I see sometimes is even a bigger struggle in those children with ADHD and with behaviors if they show gifted on testing, right? For some reason, sometimes I think that gifted means neurotypical. Gifted means no disability. When in reality, we know that gifted certainly can be side by side with the disability of ADHD. And also, we sometimes forget about the children who are diagnosed with the inattentive diagnosis of ADHD because their behaviors are not seen. they're not impacting the classroom, they're not disruptive, but in their heads, they are confused sometimes, they are not focused, they're not able to process the language as quickly as they need to for a lecture. So there are quiet behaviors, and I think I equate quiet behaviors as behaviors that are related to missing assignments or missing notes or not asking for help. All of those behaviors, the behaviors that I speak to, are not necessarily disruptive. They're also behaviors that are impacting education, right? And those behaviors, whatever they may be, are related to ADHD. So the question is, ADHD affecting behavior, and how does that happen? So although we don't really use, they're developing more ways of diagnoses, like they would never use a scan and come up with, oh, this brain is 3 to 4% smaller, so this child has ADHD. They can't use that as a diagnosis. But consistently, that this has been a fact that has been seen, that there is some underdeveloped part of the prefrontal cortex, which is where these behaviors come from, and the structure. So it's the size and the structure. And even more than that are the neurochemical issues, which is related to why we give medication to our kids. It's kind of sounds silly, we're giving our kids stimulants and we're talking about kids who are hyperactive. But in reality, the prefrontal cortex, the neurochemical issues, are creating an underdeveloped type of presence. And that's why there is issues along executive functioning issues, which is what I'll talk about shortly, and behaviors and all of those kinds of issues. So there really is medically a lack of enough of those neurotransmitters across the nerve synapses. And the reason I bring this up, not because I want everybody to be a chemist, but I find it interesting for people to know that, because it just backs up the fact that, yes, ADHD is medical. This is a true medical diagnosis. There is nothing about this that's fake. It is medical and is uncontrollable by the child. So, and again, research around neuroimaging, if we could ever get, well, we need a lot of things around ADHD, but if we could ever get a way to definitively diagnose ADHD, it would not only be a good thing, so you know exactly what your child has, but I think it maybe would give it more credence that this is a definite medical diagnosis and it's not something people are making up. So maybe that will happen in the future. I don't know. So as I was saying, executive functioning arises from that prefrontal cortex that is underdeveloped and understimulated because of the lack of neurotransmitters. And executive functioning is kind of an umbrella, and it's an umbrella that comprises the cognitive functioning that we all need for success, that those of us who don't struggle take for granted. The following are some: working memory, initiating a task, sustaining focus, emotional regulation, impulsivity, planning, problem solving, time management, and organization. And I'll try to relate some of these to the actual classroom on the next slide. But these are all taken for granted. Now, not all executive functioning skills are impacted by every child with ADHD, because we all still do have to remember that, we're not talking about just ADHD, we're talking about an individual. So it may only impact a couple. And it may not, or it may impact one in one way where it doesn't affect somebody in that way. So somebody may have time management problems and just struggle with understanding how long things take. So things are late. But then there might be somebody else who can do that, but maybe they're just struggling in that area in certain areas, maybe not in school areas, maybe in social areas, you know, so it's variable, just kind of depends on that child. And again, all of these deficits that can occur make our kids look lazy, and those terms are used. So initiation, again, if a child has an assignment and there's like a need for the follow through to finish, and that doesn't happen, then the assignment is late. Organization, I mean, that's just such a lot, that's a big term. So I would say organization related to maybe not writing down an assignment in the right place, or papers lost, those kinds of things that create late and missed assignments. Working memory, that is the difficulty in holding on to information, but paying attention to something else, and then being able to use that information you're holding on to at the same time that you're paying attention to something else. And again, it sounds so complicated, but those of us who don't struggle with that don't find it to be a problem at all, or maybe a minor problem. But in many of our kids, it's a major problem. So that creates that difficulty with following multi-step instructions. Math problems are used a lot to compare working memory issues, because they can be multi-step, and they can be difficult because the child is unable to hold on to certain pieces of information they need to complete the problem. Remembering a direction of a writing skill, remembering how to spell those words, learning to read and memorize sight words. Time management, again, that's kind of, I think it kind of intermingles with organization, late assignments, loss of points. Planning intertwined with time management, you know, planning meaning once you're in, and that's when it's really thought to be that you can move forward and be mature and forget about the fact that you had a disability last year, and you can suddenly do a project with no issue. And those projects are multi-step, and they're maybe one is building on the other. So if you have problems with planning, if you have problems with time management, you are definitely going to have problems with getting a project in on time, for sure. And side note, I think this is a huge issue. And even in college, my son had trouble with projects, and he had to learn all of this. And it wasn't me. I couldn't coach my own son. So he had a coach, and it was invaluable. You know, so a lot of these issues that may not be remediated, but that are supported can really teach a child how to move forward over the long haul. It's definitely a possible situation, but they need to be supported, and they need to understand strategies that will work for them. And processing language, another big one, I think. Missing assignments that are verbalized, missing parts of a lecture. If you have a teacher who may be speaking fast, or even not, but they're fast for that child, you're going to get only bits and pieces of notes from that child. And you're also going to have maybe a child who becomes unfocused because they lost interest in following what was going on, because now they don't know what's going on, you know? Can you imagine that? It's very difficult. So all of the previous create frustration and anger on the part of the child. This is not done on purpose. What child wants to fail? What child wants people telling him or her that they are not meeting expectation? None that I know of. So that happens, and then you have high levels of classroom frustration. You have probably some kind of a punishment, maybe a detention, maybe a missed recess, maybe missed lunch, staying after school, all sorts of negative issues relating to the lack of completion of assignments and follow through, and then low grades. And so then what do we have after that? We have low levels of self-esteem. which if you have a low level of self-esteem, I don't know how you come back from that. So it's not a good circle of events at all. In addition, you have increased negative behaviors possibly, refusals, boredom, acting out, enhanced with already the symptoms of impulsivity and hyperactivity. They're already there with that child. And by the way, the boredom part is pretty serious. We talk about being bored, but if we are neurotypical, we don't have ADHD, we can sit through a lecture or just something that we're not particularly thrilled about, but we can pay attention. But our kids, if they are truly bored, and many times the boredom is because they can't follow it, they are truly bored. It is physically painful for them to pay attention, and they're just not with you at all. Those kids with inattentive ADHD are suffering the same consequence, but not seen as overtly. So, it's ironic, isn't it? I mean, I think to have combined type can be a nightmare because you have a child who's creating havoc in the classroom and all that negativity flying in their faces all the time. But at least they are diagnosed, right? With kids with inattentive, sometimes they're not diagnosed right away. And they are not doing well. They are not feeling good about themselves, but nobody really sees what's going on. And many times, coexisting conditions of ADHD are diagnosed ahead of the inattentive ADHD. And I've read many times, a lot of times it's girls. And so the depression that can coexist with inattentive that is diagnosed, and the ADHD is missed. So that is another concern. And I just actually read something about the Academy of Pediatrics, and I think what we all kind of heard in the past is that pediatricians, more than half of our kids who are diagnosed by pediatricians. Now, pediatricians in general, not every one of them, but in general, do not have the experience to diagnose or treat kids with ADHD. But this is the primary physician that this child sees, right? So they are actually looking into making things better for pediatricians to be better able to diagnose and treat our kids with ADHD. And one of the things that they're talking about is, being aware that most children with ADHD have one coexisting disorder. So one way to dive into the diagnosis of ADHD would be to discover that coexisting disorder. I mean, it's kind of backwards, but still, it raises that red flag of, that this kid has some behaviors, but this kid also has some anxiety, or this kid also has a learning difference, and that coexists with that diagnosis. So that's kind of an interesting thought. It's just actually more information for our pediatricians to follow. And again, to follow the DSM-5, which is the criteria to make these diagnoses. You don't want, and this is what I think this mom was talking about too, being misdiagnosed, but it happens a lot. You don't want a parent to take a kid to a doctor. Oh, this kid's getting in trouble all the time at school. This kid won't sit still. This kid, is not doing well in school. You must have ADHD. Here's the diagnosis. So we don't want that either. We want a little bit more structure around all of that. So that's a positive anyway, as far as really being aware that the diagnosis of ADHD should be taken much more seriously. And, it shouldn't be just outward behavior that we're looking at. And again, this is just what I see, and it's heartbreaking to me to see it, this vicious circle of negative behavior. There's a lack of strategies around the executive functioning skills because in many cases, like I said, those are going to be more obvious when a kid is in middle and high school. And then when they're in middle and high school, they're presumably mature enough now to figure it out. So what is their problem? So they don't have the strategies, and they've got the symptoms of inattention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. And so where does that lead us? It leads us to more negative behaviors, acting out, frustration, and low self-esteem. the manifestation meeting is supposed to happen before there are more than 10 days of suspensions. This is supposed to happen to determine the connection between behavior and the disability. Now, I don't think necessarily you have to have a child be suspended for 10 days before you can initiate this meeting. That's kind of silly. If it's written as that, but I would think that if you're showing that direction, those signs, I think 4 or 5 is plenty to start to consider this. And remember too, those suspensions are impacting their academic success, and they are not being given FAPE, free and appropriate public education, which is what their right is. So it really is a wrong thing for this to happen. And it happens constantly. So in this manifestation meeting, the IEP is reviewed and everything around any kinds of behaviors and reasons for detentions and suspensions. It's determined if the behavior is related to the disability. The next step is to determine existence of support. And that is, does this child have a behavior plan? And is it being followed? Now, it could be that it's there and not being followed. It could be it's being followed, but it's never been, no one's ever looked at it and given data to figure out whether or not it's effective. So it's never been tweaked. So there could be tons of reasons why a plan's in place and it's not working. And one of those reasons doesn't have to be that it's the child's fault. So if there's not a behavior plan in place, then an FBA, a functional behavioral assessment, must be completed. So that assessment can be conducted by a behavior psychologist within the district, or it can be outsourced. So it depends on whether or not the school has someone to do that. And I've seen it done either way. They can outsource or they can use someone, as long as someone in the district knows, you know, how to go about one of these assessments. And what that is a collection of behaviors in various environments in the school over a period of time. So it's not just behaviors in the classroom, it's behaviors in more than one classroom and in unstructured environments. Because remember, sometimes our kids have behaviors that are in those unstructured environments, like recess, like lunch. And many times there is not anyone who are overlooking those kids. And, you know, I don't think that there are always a full explanation that's complete in what really happened in those environments. I hate to say this because it sounds like I'm saying, oh, poor kids, our kids never did do anything wrong. Of course they're kids and they do. But I have seen that where I think sometimes you can be red flagged, right? And you can have a behavior in the environment that was never seen, but somehow it's believed that maybe you were the problem because of the previous behaviors that you had shown. And it may not be true. So once that is done, the evaluation happens to determine what were the triggers of those unwanted behaviors. And then in using that information, a behavior plan can be developed. And it's so important for it to be positive. It's so important for it to be not overwhelming. You know, to start out with a behavior plan of maybe 2 goals, I think sometimes is much better than having multiple goals that no one's following. So the 2 top goals, I would say, would be the most important to come up with. But certainly the person who does this FBA is also possessing expertise in developing a behavior plan. And also, just so I don't forget to say this, so important too, you know, so many times we fight for an IEP or we fight for this behavior plan. And then what we have to remember is the fight is only half the battle. The other half is making sure it's working. So just like an IEP, this behavior plan has to be followed. Every teacher has to know about it. and there has to be data related to it, whether or not you want to, depends on what's happening. If it's pretty significant issues and you, the parent, wants data weekly to see if that is working, then it should be weekly. At some point when there's some stability, you can do it quarterly, just like you have data for IEPs. But you certainly have to have data, because if you don't, this is a waste of time, because nobody will necessarily follow it, or if they are following it, it's being followed, but it's not working. Or it could be working, but as the child grows, things are changing quickly and it needs to be changed. So I can't enforce that enough about the fight to get it, and then the importance of the data and the importance of communication between home and school is there, and sometimes parents will follow that behavior plan that's happening in school with positive reinforcements at home too. Now, they might have a separate behavior plan at home, maybe a couple of chores with reinforcements, and reinforcements that are immediate, which is daily, and reinforcements that are weekly, because they need to have immediate reinforcement or it's not working. So whatever is happening in the school, sometimes maybe the parent can be the person who is the weekly reward, and again, I'm not an expert in developing these behavior plans, but I know the general gist of all of them, and that is the importance of, first of all, making it simple, and also building in success. If you have a goal, you want to build in success, that you don't expect that goal to be achieved every day necessarily in the beginning. Maybe 3 out of 5 days, X is happening. You have to have some kind of success built in, or it will become negative because they're not going to be able to do it. So that's important too. But again, if you have some kind of positive reinforcement, particularly when they're young, like immediate positive reinforcements on a daily basis, and then you have weekly, and maybe that's the parent at home. There's just so many variations to these. And again, it kind of also depends on the child and what works for them. So it's a lot of tweaking. And again, I think if you don't know it by now, behaviors are not intentional. And this comes from the IDEA, which is special ed, Individual Disability Education Act. Schools must consider strategies, including positive behavioral interventions, strategies, and supports to address behaviors. Positive behavioral plans that are individualized can provide needed positive reinforcement to achievements. So the thought is, and we were told this too when my son was a little boy, and it was kind of an interesting comment made by the psychologist. You can be run ragged by a child who is hyperactive and impulsive. So suddenly your child is, well, this is a stretch to say, but you know what I mean, behaving, meaning you're not being stressed out right then. And like maybe that child is coloring. Maybe that child is doing a video game, and you're quiet, right? You don't want to say anything to disrupt this behavior that's not being disruptive. But like he pointed out, but that is the time that you do reinforce the positive. That's like, you're doing a great job. What you're doing right now, that picture looks amazing. Or you're very clever in the way you were playing that video game, because you are only reinforcing the positive behaviors, and you're giving them, of course, some self-esteem as well, and not reacting as much to the negatives. Pretty soon there's not as much time for negativity, and there's more time for positivity. Sounds easy, I know, but it's an interesting thought, and it makes a lot of sense. I think I wrote this wrong, but punitive responses certainly don't lead to success, and they lead to negative self-esteem. And again, it's a vicious circle of behaviors, punishment, and failure. And that's not what we're hoping for. Examples of mismanagement that I hear all the time: multiple suspensions. Again, multiple suspensions, low self-esteem, negative responses, no strategies, no support, and a denial of fate. There's nothing good about suspensions, especially when there's nothing supporting that child. Recess punishment. You don't want to take away recess from a kid with ADHD. Bad idea. They need to be out, they need to be moving, and they don't need to be sitting all day. Obviously, mismanagement is suspending and not having a behavior plan in place. And again, this IDEA is very specific on that. They are failing that child if they are not addressing their disability. Negative responses to negative behaviors, like I said, which negative responses are suspensions or detentions or calling out a child in class, whatever it may be. Missed assignments, lost points, and failure, right? So you're having behaviors that are creating those missed assignments. Like I said, the behaviors that are really under that umbrella of executive functioning that have not been dealt with. And so they're failing. And then many times I hear how parents are called to pick up their child. Denial of fate. And this is what they think. I am not bad, I have ADHD, except they think I am bad, and ADHD has nothing to do with it. So I put a little thing in here. I think sometimes the understanding is not there, but the behavior is there in the classroom. So sometimes a classroom chart's in place. Classroom chart may be for the whole class, reds and greens, and, there's all sorts of classroom charts. I think they may be good for some kids, but the theory behind it and the things that I've seen, they're not that great for them. Their behavior plans I like because they are a document that becomes a part of the IEP, so that travels with the child year to year. Classroom charts don't. So it's a legal part of the IEP. So I would say that's really the more effective and more important part to have. And behavior plans are much more specific. Classroom charts are, I guess, based on, whether or not a child didn't call out, more than twice in the day. I don't know exactly. They're all different. These are very individualized, these behavior plans for that child with a plan. And classroom charts can be demeaning. They probably do work for some, but again, they don't travel with the child. So for our kids with ADHD, I don't know. I mean, I'm certainly some of you may have had good luck with them, and that's fine. But I've seen where they're not good either. So it kind of depends again on the child. But if you want something that you've got some significant issues and you want something that is legal, part of a document, and is going to stay with that child, then I would say behavior plans are better. And I think too, you're not going to see classroom charts like that, in middle school, obviously. You're going to see them more likely with a younger child. So these are the lists of things that I think that I've kind of touched on that are takeaways for behavior management in children with ADHD. The overt behaviors that do not show compliance can be related to both impulsivity and hyperactivity, as well as executive functioning deficits. So again, overtly impulsive and hyperactive, and they're not paying attention, they're distracted. All of those things are symptoms of ADHD. But also, executive functioning deficits create that as well, like transitioning, organization, time management, word processing the lectures, working memory, all of those things. They can certainly create and add to the behaviors of that child too, because it's a level of frustration and failure. Those who are only inattentive, can you remember the one type of diagnosis you could have just inattentive, appear to be okay. But they're struggling, they can be struggling too. The fact that so many people believe, and I still think people in schools believe as well, that if that child is struggling, ADHD never comes to mind. but they could have that. Because again, the diagnosis affecting that child in the same way in areas of executive functioning and interfering with success. Negativity toward a child not being compliant will only create more negativity on the part of the child. And that is so true in our kids with ADHD. A high percentage of kids with ADHD have oppositional defiance disorder, and they're more likely going to respond negative when they are treated negatively. The IDEA mandates the need for the school to support this behavior related to the medical disability of ADHD. You do have the law on your side. Once the manifestation meeting is set up and it is decided that behaviors are related to ADHD, an FBA and a behavior plan must be developed. If a behavior plan is in place, determine if the issues are either that it needs to be tweaked or it needs to be followed. And be sure that behavior plan is part of the IEP. And that means, no, it's not an attachment. It is part of the IEP. Never let the school ever say, we'll attach it to the IEP. No, it's a part of the IEP. Communication between home and school is imperative. Reasons: what is working and positive reinforcement at home. Obviously, if you have goals, you want to make sure that the behavior plan is working. And many times, in particular, I think of small children too, where the reinforcers that you're using, they get bored with, and they have to have that changed. So sometimes the reinforcers aren't working. All of that's important to know. And it seems more and more the communication piece is left out, and things can be happening in the school and the parents aren't aware of any of that. And the child comes home and doesn't want to talk about it, or forgot about it, or doesn't even know how to verbalize it. So that's why there needs to be communication. And like I had said before, sometimes home can be a positive reinforcer for maybe the week. They had success 5 days during the week with the expected goals in place each day, and their reinforcer on Friday could be what they choose. They go to a movie with a parent, or they have a sleepover with a friend, something like that. Important for them to say what they want, to have some kind of input. Or an older child, maybe more screen time, even older, maybe they have a driver's license and they want to go somewhere. So it kind of depends a lot on that child. The age of the child. So I am really big on self-advocacy, that child being able to self-advocate, and they can't if they're not supported. And I think sometimes, and I hear this too, and I actually heard this today, the expectation for a child to admit when that child didn't understand an assignment, said he was fine, went home and he wasn't fine. And the mother didn't know what to do because she didn't even know the assignment. So why that happens? Probably because of the swarming of negativity a lot of times. I think that self-advocacy can come over time, and it has to, because they're going to be in high school and they're going to be in, wherever they're going, whether they're in a trade school or they're in college or wherever, they need to be able to self-advocate, and they need to feel okay about that too. And obviously you as the parent know that because you're involved with your child, you're on this webinar. And I think that's, a huge deal that you are a true part of the life of a child with ADHD. Sometimes people aren't, sometimes maybe even parents don't believe it. But I think that if you're involved and that child has that one or two positive people in their life who believe in them, and realize that they're capable, they can be successful, and they can learn more about themselves and what works for them. And they know they have the right to ask those questions, and they have the right to advocate for themselves. It's not easy. Removing negativity from their everyday life and ensuring positivity for what they can do means everything to their self-esteem. And if they have that, they can self-advocate. So I have an angry guy and a guy who's failing with a new mindset, with a new result of a successful, happy kid. So that concludes my third webinar on behavior and support of our children with ADHD. I'm happy to answer questions for a little bit, and I can get through as many as I can, and I'll address those questions. What do you do to address this in a school district that will not provide the supports for my son? They continue to try to place him in specialized settings. They suspended him for 2 days, and the referral says his behavior was intentional. Wow, that's horrible. I think that is what I see so much, I think, and I actually, the other point you have here too, is I've seen that too, where they feel like their school isn't equipped to deal with kids with ADHD, so they will throw them in those specialized schools where a lot of those kids have significant behavioral issues, conduct disorders, which are, more crime related. So that's not what you want. Our kids don't belong in those type of settings, unless they have some kind of a conduct disorder, which, I'm not talking to that right now. I'm just talking to the kids with behavioral issues that can be helped with the correct supports and behavior plans. So they can't, if this school is a public school and they receive federal funds, they can't refuse you, and all I can say is, aside from reaching out to me later to ask me more questions about this, which I'll leave my email, my business email. All I can say is that just remember that everything you ask for and everything you want to document has to be written. Everything has to be in writing, or it didn't happen, and you can't prove that it was. And you say that it's public school. They can't. They're going to try to. Maybe it's money related, or they don't believe in it, or they have all sorts of reasons why. But in the end, they have to provide the supports for your son. They cannot put him in a specialized setting if they haven't even done a behavior plan for him. They can't do that. And they can't keep suspending him either. So you need to document the issues that you've been having, and that's the lack of support, and that you request a manifestation meeting. That's what I would think. Today, I left Oakland Unified School District, was told my ADHD sensory processing child qualified for a counseling enriched program. Because of this, I applied for inter-district transfer to the Piedmont Unified School District, as this district gets more resources for special needs students. Do you think I need a counseling enriched program, or is this student dependent? Is a counseling program classroom normal for a child diagnosed with ADHD? I don't know. The problem is that, states and districts have different letterings for what they do. So I'm not really familiar with what that is. Counseling enriched program. It sounds like a good thing, but I don't know. Does that mean that your child has to be in a different district? I don't know. I guess I don't know enough about the program. I think maybe you need to find out more about what the program offers to determine whether or not it really would be helpful. It's for behaviorally challenged students. Well, it's another program. And I guess I would be careful about jumping into it if it's actually a different kind of a classroom because you haven't been offered a behavior plan. I think you need to find out more about that before I can really make that, decision. Yeah, definitely. I objected to the FBA completed by the school. It was one page and lacked any substance. It took the district 5 months to authorize my independent educational evaluation request for an FBA. By the time it was done, there were 3 weeks left in the school year. Nothing was implemented from the FBA and it was not incorporated into the IEP. The district recommended my son go to a separate setting, social behavior support class, which turned out to be a self-contained class, and my son's behaviors are declining. Yeah, I've heard that too. Don't let your kids go in self-contained classrooms. Oh, this is terrible. I'm so sorry to hear that. It seems like schools just don't want to, so many of them don't want to deal with it, don't know how to deal with it, so they think it's just better to throw the kid in a class with a lot of behavior issues. And yeah, their behaviors do decline because they follow those behaviors. And of course you didn't know, like that's terrible. They're going to tell you that a self-contained classroom is going to help the child's behaviors instead of doing their job. And I don't know why it would take 5 months for an FBA, and that's totally insane. And why you would do it and then you wouldn't use it to make a behavior plan. That's terrible. So that's what you need. That's what I would say. You document and you go back to them and say that the FBA needs to formulate a behavior plan and you don't want your child in self-contained. So self-contained, it's just it's like multiple kids with multiple disabilities. So it's not just one type of issue in that classroom. There's lots of different issues. And they may or may not address your particular child. And what I have seen, and not that I've seen tons of them, but what I've seen, it seems like the kids with ADHD are the stars, right? They're the leaders of the classroom because there are so many multiply disabled children. And I'm not saying that self-contained classrooms are a bad thing. I'm saying that sometimes kids with ADHD should not be in those classrooms. And it is where they put them when they don't want to deal with the behaviors. And it's dead, then they're dead wrong. And they can't get away with it legally, but they can get away with it if they push it and they can get away with it, right? See what else I can answer. And again, I'm just trying to go through what I can see right now. Yeah. So you said, so this is a CEC. Could be that those initials could mean self-contained in a different way. Yeah. Yep. I've had 11 IEP meetings in 1 year. It's a lot of IEP meetings, but you can. But you have to start holding their feet to the fire regarding what they're not doing and what is due you. What is the difference between ADD and ADHD? Well, the diagnosis is all ADHD. The way they diagnose it now is it's 3 kinds of ADHD. So it's the combined type, just the impulsive type, and the inattentive type. Even though people call inattentive ADD, They're really all ADHD, but they're listed with all those, the 3 kinds. My child attends a parochial school and has a 504 for ADHD and anxiety. The school would like to have him evaluated for behavior for a possible IEP. They are telling us that if we agree to the IEP, he will need to be bused to the local public school for a behavior class every day. Is that a requirement? Well, apparently it's a district requirement, but it's not a requirement, no. I was actually thinking, oh, wow, that's really cool. The school is actually addressing behavior. No, they're trying to move him out of the building, I guess. So he stays in your school, the parochial school, but he's bused to a behavior class every day. I don't know. I mean, the problem with that sometimes, I think, is if you're segregating the behavior into a class, right? So can a child generalize to everyday living from the one class that he's in? You know, does it really make sense to that child? Is it going to be successful to generalize? I mean, I've heard and read things about, you know, the social classes, you know, for kids with ADHD and autism, that sometimes it's questionable because they can't transfer what they see and learn in those classes to the regular everyday life and where they are in different environments. And I think that would be the same thing. I don't know why there would have to be a behavior class. I think what I would do is put in writing again that, you know, you're certainly willing to have them evaluated, and who's going to do the evaluation, and what will the results be as far as behavior plan and the IEP, and why would it have to be a requirement if you have a behavior plan that's being followed? And it's, you know, throughout the day. It's not like one behavior class and then he comes back. That seems a little bit strange to me. Also, he's been sent home from school 4 times in the past 2.5 months for behavior. Yeah, no. They can't be doing that either. So they're not doing their job, and they want to assess behavior because they want you out of the building, I guess, or they want him out of the building. So again, I think that it's important to say that you are all about supporting your child with behavior issues in the school because you want your child to achieve academic success and FAPE, F-A-P-E. So you are requesting an FBA to develop a good positive behavior plan for every day, and you don't want him bust. Once the manifestation meeting determined everything was his disability, that IEP team agreement must be into his IEP document. In what section? I don't know that it matters, the section, just as long as it's part of just, you know, I would say, well, it's really a plan, it's a goal, and maybe the goal section probably would be good. But even though district transferred him to another setting in a special school, my son is in middle school with autism and ADHD. Yeah, there's a lot of people whose kids are being transferred out of the schools, and it's not, and the school's not doing their job. Before they do that, they have to be doing their job. My son, 5 years old, has recently been identified as ADHD combined. He is currently on medication and his behaviors have decreased almost completely. He has his IEP 504 eligibility meeting after Christmas. His teacher has taken him off his behavior chart, but I am concerned for the future. Can the school decide if he needs a 504 with a diagnosis? So your child does not have a 504 or an IEP right now. Okay. So I guess the question is, how are they having an eligibility meeting? What are they doing? Are they doing testing first and then they're going to talk to you? There's that, and that's fine. A 504 can certainly work for a child with ADHD. And they do work as long as they're specific and they're individualized. So I would just say that when you go to the meeting, that you document the issues that you see that you think would require the support that you're asking for. If that makes sense. What is a classroom chart? Well, sometimes they'll just do a chart with, behaviors, like good and bad, colors that show behaviors that are good and bad for each child. And there's like a clip, there's a chart that has a clip. So if you've done something not right, you have to put a clip, remove a clip, put a clip on. I don't know. I don't think it works for a lot of our kids. And yes, there is, it should be following, I think prior to this webinar and following, there's links to recordings of all 3 of my webinars. So there's another, you can definitely watch it again. Oh, and getting back to this one-page FBA, I guess I didn't even address that. That's another issue too, because the one-page part does seem a little funny, because the substance part should be in more than one environment in the school. So, and I guess I would have to wonder who did it and were they qualified to do that. So that's something else you could find out as well. It doesn't work. Yeah, these classroom charts, I think they're more demeaning than anything else. If there's behaviors that are happening, then your child needs a behavior plan and not a classroom chart. Yes, there'll be a link to rewatch my webinar. How do I feel about homeschool? I know people do it because they get so frustrated with the school system that they take their kids and do their own thing. And I think it does work for some people as long as you can be home to do it and you're not overwhelmed with a bunch of other things. There's not a right and wrong. It's certainly a commitment. Sometimes people will homeschool for a number of years and then let their kid go back to school. And I guess the question is how old and would your child feel about that as well, about homeschool? It is that issue of the social issue. But again, I've heard that he's only 5. Okay. So I know there's groups so that you can, connect to other fellow homeschoolers and have kids connected as well. So there are ways to make sure the social part is there. And, if you can do it, I don't blame you at all. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to that. It's what you feel you're capable of and what you're willing to commit to. Let me just see if there's anything else. Where can I find a positive behavior plan to implement at home? Well, there's a lot of, if you Google things, you can find things, but you can find examples of positive behavior plans. But again, you can make up your own as well. And I think, like I said too, even if you're doing a home positive behavior plan, make it very individualized to what you want your child to achieve, whether it is making sure that all his papers are in his backpack to be ready for the morning, or it's deciding on what to wear the next morning, or being able to follow maybe 2 or 3 step instructions in the morning, things like that, things that are creating negativity that you want to change and you want to reinforce positivity. So you can pick 2 or 3 of those, and then you can come up with let's say you're doing it over 5 days, and in the beginning you're going to only expect those 3 goals to be achieved maybe 3 out of 5 days, or maybe even 2 out of 5 days, to really build in success. And each day they are reinforced positively reinforced. And, what is that reinforcement? I mean, it depends on the child. Of course, you're not going to give a teenager stickers, right? So it kind of depends on who that child is. Sometimes reinforcement is just a lot of verbal reinforcement and acceptance from you, and then, but there has to be some kind of reinforcement daily, and then a weekly. So they know that there's something coming weekly. That's a good thing. But in our kids with ADHD, it's hard for them to look toward the future like that and have that affect their current behavior. So you can't leave it just hanging out there just for like next Friday, you'll get to go to a movie with your friends. It may not work that way, but they know that there is positive reinforcement at the end of the week too. So that's really it. It's really like those reinforcers during the week and at the end of the week, that they have impact into determining what they are, and what you determine to be maybe 2 top important goals you want to work on. I thought you already have, or you will, again, get the links for all of my 3 webinars. So the links will be there to hear them all. How many IEP meetings before they can legally recommend having them removed from the school and placed into a behavioral school? None. There's no limit to IEP meetings at all. The only one that's mandated is an annual, but you can call as many IEP meetings as you want. And if this is all around behavior, then somebody's not doing their job. I haven't asked for data regarding my son's behavior plan, and I feel like I have totally dropped the ball in this area. What do I specifically ask for? My son has an IEP and a BIP. No, you haven't. You haven't dropped the ball at all. And it would be nice if they would, put that information out there. But I think what I would do would be to, and sometimes you can make changes in the IEP without having a meeting. So you can reach out to your case manager, and you can ask her. She sometimes, depending on the child's age, she can, if you have multiple teachers, she can be the intermediary and go to each of the teachers to gather that information for you. And also, I think I would also say that since you obviously aren't getting the data, then I would say, and I would like to make a change in the IEP, because I want right now, since I don't have information, I want communication on a weekly basis, and I want to put in my IEP. All right, a couple more. I just lost. An ADHD child that tends to hit when upset, how can I protect him legally? Well, see, again, I think the issue again is, that's an issue that has to be dealt with, right? The schools have grounds to put kids in alternative settings for a limited time. To my understanding, when there's a weapon involved or there's drugs involved, things like that. The hitting, he definitely, that's a part of his disability. He has emotional regulation issues, right? So that needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed with this NFBA, and sometimes parents will have that as well as a therapist too, to talk things out. But I think that again, I don't think you have to worry about the legal issues. Like, how old is your child? He's 5. Yeah. So I think there needs certainly to be some intervention there that's not happening right now. There needs to be definitely a behavior plan. You know, he can be reinforced positively for the correct behavior. He can be talked to about that, and he can be talked to about strategies to overcome all that rage inside, or whatever is happening inside, to deal with, rather than hitting. That has to be addressed. It only happens in school. Yeah, well, then I think you need eyes, which means I think that you definitely need someone to come in to do an FBA to find out what those triggers are, because you're not getting information. You need to know what's happening. My son has ADHD combined, along with other disorders, received IEP last year, and he's now in middle school. Teachers are not willing to communicate with me. Special ed teacher was hired 2 months after school started. The entire 5th grade class is testing and learning at a 3rd grade level. My son gets screamed at daily by teachers. I've witnessed it standing in the hall. He has lost books for weeks at a time. Not one staff member told me about it. I had to go to the school to search for books. He has the ability to read and learn at 6th grade level, but behaviors are the only thing the school will communicate to me. Should I consider taking him out of school? Oh, wow. Well, that would be a long journey to evaluate. If you want to talk further to me, you can send me an email. But I think there would be a whole lot to look into before you would just take him out of school. I think that, you know, they're clearly not following the IEP. I don't know if you have communication in the IEP. The special ed teacher or the case manager should be helping you, making sure that things are being followed. You know, there just needs to be some meetings and some structure around all of this, I think. So, yeah, I will just reinforce my email so you can, well, what I should do is I'll leave maybe I could leave the link on my website where you can sign up for a free phone consult. And so we can go over things. We can go over things that way. So let me find where I can write this. Hold on a minute. Where is it? One second. Yeah, a lot of you have some very serious issues. I don't understand why schools are so willing to be so adversarial like this. I just don't understand it. See if there's anything else I can answer while I'm waiting here. My grandson was diagnosed with ADHD and ODD. Should he have an IEP? Not necessarily. Having an ADHD diagnosis does not grant you an IEP. There has to be reasons for that, limited access to education, and you know, proof of that. So I think that the first step is documenting the things that you see that are creating lack of educational ability, you know, things that are happening. But no, it doesn't mean necessarily he could need a 504. That could be a possibility as well. It just depends on the struggles that he currently has. Let's see if there's anything else. And all right, let me put down my email. See where I can put that. Well, let me see here. Trying to figure out where I can write this. Okay. So I just sent my email and my website. I don't know if you guys see it because I don't know what happened to it. Wait. Where is it? I don't know if anybody sees it. I did type it in there. Hmm. Well, I guess I don't see where I can type it in here. I'm sorry. So my email is Karen, Karen, at addadvocate.com. Karen at addadvocate.com. And my website is www.addadvocate.com. And you can go on there too, and you can see group coaching and advocacy, and you can sign up for a free phone consult if you go into my website directly. If you want to go into it, that's a good way to reach me as well. They'll come directly to me. See if I can answer one more question. Um, oh, the question about can the school decide if he needs a 504 and this child is 5? He's in kindergarten. Pediatrician diagnosed using teacher questionnaires. Yeah, that's good. That's objective. Um, see if I finished all you guys for now. .504 is not a special ed support. It is general education. It's part of the Rehab Act of 1973, and it's really a civil rights law where it protects both physical and mental disabilities. So it puts them, um, it protects children, and it protects children, adults as well, but protects children with disabilities that affect a major life function. And there's several major life functions, and there's a couple that relate to ADHD, learning, and I think concentration are a couple of them that apply. So a 504 would be, there's no special ed services, but it's just general education issues around the individual reasons why a child may be struggling with a disability. So, some of the things that are put in 504s, you think, sometimes I think those are IEP things. It just depends sometimes on the district. And sometimes 504s really work well as long as they're individualized. But there could be, a common one, which is very generic, which is preferential seating, whether that's in the front or the back, one-on-one testing, getting notes from the teacher, things like that. That 504s can be good. Do you have to have an IEP to have a behavior plan? Can you have a behavior plan with a 504? My understanding is you need an IEP to have a behavior plan that's, a legal document, which is what you want. A behavior plan with a 504, I could see that being suggested to avoid the IEP, right? And, I don't think that there's a reason why you can't start with one if they were willing to do a behavior plan with that 504 if it worked. But generally, I see the behavior plans come into play because there's a need, and a significant need, and that usually means that need should be part of an IEP. Um, I keep going back. Hold on. I think I saw a question about 504 for adults. And certainly 504s, because IEPs expire once a child graduates from high school. And so if there are issues with that disability, 504s are the things that are followed. Okay. So, yeah, you definitely can have a 504 for ADHD. Oh, there it is. Okay. So the link is sent. If you look into the chat box, the Q&A, that if you go to that link, which is on my website, you will see packages, and you will see where you can sign up for a free phone consult with me, and that will come directly to my inbox, and I can respond to your email that way, and then we can come up with a time that works for both of us. Does everybody have that? You should all see it. So on that note, as long as you all see that, I'm assuming, I am going to close down my presentation for now. Please reach out to me if I didn't fully answer your questions or you need more help. I'll be happy to help you in any way that I can. I really appreciate you guys being here. You are your child's advocate until your child can self-advocate. And that's so, so important. Good job, all of you. Thanks for coming again.